From a fundamental biophysical perspective, both prehistoric human evolution and the course of history can be seen as the quest for controlling greater stores and flows of more concentrated and more versatile forms of energy, and converting them in more affordable ways at lower costs and with higher efficiencies into heat, light, and motion. Nat, we are back with another great episode of Made You Think.
We are back, and it has been lovely to see all of you fine people still subscribed and hanging out after our 1.5 year long hiatus. We're very happy to be back here with you. I've gotten a lot of nice emails and tweets from people who are excited we're doing this again. Have you been getting that too?
Yeah, likewise. Yep. Yeah, people are super supportive, and it's so cool to see people sticking with it, and actually new people kind of popping into the Made You Think cult. MYT cult, hashtag MYT cult. In between, I've met a bunch of people through DMs or just tweets who discovered us during the hiatus, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, super cool. I'm really happy that
it's the secret growth hack to growing a podcast. Go on,
just don't publish anything for a 1.5 years.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it's funny because I'm working on growing up my YouTube channel right now. So It's Nat on YouTube for everyone who's not already subscribed. But so I'm reading all of this stuff about growing a YouTube channel and what works and what doesn't. And I'm just having this funny kind of deja vu or inquisitiveness, I guess, where all of the advice on growing a podcast is oh, you should do short episodes and you should do it, once or twice a week, and you want to put out more content or whatever. And I'm seeing similar stuff with YouTube, but then it's well, Neil and I didn't publish a podcast for 1.5 years, and we actually kind of grew in that time. So how much of this advice is really true?
Yeah, and it's definitely not short episodes that we do. So, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that type of advice is it's generalized, and it also depends what the purpose is, right? Right. I met someone recently who does helps, I guess, companies create podcasts, and I think the KPI or the metric that they're optimizing for is sales or new customer meetings and that type of stuff, and it's a totally different way of viewing a podcast than what we're doing here.
Definitely.
And I guess both work, right? Their way is to get more leads, and and ours is that's not really why. I don't even know why we're doing this.
What is our goal here exactly?
Yeah.
I guess it's an excuse for us to hang out on a fixed schedule, pretty much.
Exactly.
It's funny. I feel if you have friends who are kind of entrepreneurial and ambitious, pretty much the only reliable way to spend consistent time with them is to work on something together. It's
a great point. Yeah.
Yeah. If you don't have something like that, fixing time into the schedule is just very hard to consistently carve out time together, which sounds, I don't know, it sounds worse when I say it than when I'm thinking about it in my head, but it's good motivation to team up with people on things. It's you could I'm announcing something in a couple of weeks, and it's you could have maybe made more money doing that on your own. It's yeah, but I want to hang out with these other people and do it with them.
Yep.
Right?
I think that's part of it too, is you end up wanting to work with certain people, and it's well, you like the person, and then you end up wanting to do something with them, and you kind of figure out what that thing is.
Exactly.
Yeah, but it does make it more fun, but it is also hard to especially, as you said, ambitious entrepreneurial people. On one hand, it sounds weird when you say that out loud, but it's so true. You just look around and you see it. It happens all the time.
People are busy.
And especially now that people are, this isn't true for everybody, but we're not in the same city, and it's it's much harder to, we can schedule a Zoom call to catch up. Then we're we might as well just record it and post that on the feed.
Might as well just share our hangout with everyone.
Exactly.
And here everyone is.
We don't really censor ourselves. I don't know. I can't really remember a time we've we have maybe cut some stuff out, but very rarely. I can't actually think of an example.
Yeah. Have we ever I don't think we've ever done a serious cut. If one of us goes to the bathroom or something, we cut that.
Yeah. But you guys don't want to hear
that. Just yelling down the hallway from the bathroom.
Some pepper stuff, maybe.
Yeah.
In the early days. In the early
days, yeah. Oh, yeah. When Pepper would like lose it in an ambulance or something. Yeah, yep. I think we cut those.
All right. So the book we're covering today, if you didn't get it from your title or the quote, is "Energy and Civilization" by Vaclav Smil. Is that how you say his name?
I believe that is correct. Or it might even be a soft C like Václav.
Oh, okay.
I think it's like Icelandic, I want to say. And it could be Schmil too. We're just gonna look this up.
I should have looked this up before.
I'm pretty sure we like never remember to look this up beforehand. Czech Canadian, interesting. Huh? But they don't have a it's like a T. Václav and Smil. Interesting. Anyway, I know how I found this book. How did you find this book, Neil?
I think
we independently recommended it to each other for an episode, basically.
Yeah. Well, I forget where exactly. I know that I had seen like Bill Gates say something about this book at one point. I think that may be where I heard of it. And then I know I'd seen like tweets here and there from people who had read the book. Right. And I actually read a book a few months ago called The Prize by Daniel Jurgen, I think is the author's name. And he quotes this book actually. So cool. he quotes this author. I don't know if he quotes the book, but I guess this author's definitely written other stuff about energy. It's kind of his thing. So that book is about like the history of oil. And he wrote a follow-up about renewable energy and where it's going. And I want to read that book. I just haven't gotten to it yet. But The Prize is like all about fossil fuels, but mainly about oil. And it's a fascinating book. And he mentions, I don't know if he mentions this book in particular, but he mentions the author and that like brought it back to the kind of forefront of my mind of thinking, okay, I need to read this one soon.
Nice.
That one's like narrative nonfiction. That's almost like, what's the banana book? You know which one I'm talking about? The Fish Who Ate the Whale.
The Fish That Ate the Whale.
Yeah.
Such a good book.
Yeah. It's kind of written in that style. I mean, it's not, I wouldn't say it's as good as that. It's like one notch below, but it's still very good. Nice. But it's not like this. Like this is not a narrative nonfiction in that same sense. This is more, how would you describe this? I'd say this is like almost textbooky, like but somewhat, but it's also, it is textbooky, but he uses the word I throughout the book, right? Like it's in first person in many areas of the book. So
yeah, it's in between a textbook and a more narrative book because it's somewhere in the Robert Greenosphere of information density, I would say.
Yeah. Yep. It took me a while. I'm glad we waited like 3 to 4 weeks between.
Yeah. It's like it's not a fast read. And I feel like it is one of those where if you sped through it, you would just like lose so much of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I found it from Bill Gates' recommendation. I think Gates said that Smil is his favorite writer, his favorite author. And he's like, he reads every single book that he publishes. And so when I saw that, I thought, okay, this seems like somebody who we should check out. And then Taylor Pearson, who joined for our Bitcoin episode back in the day, he was hosting a book club here in Austin for a little while. And so we read this for that book club. And that was a lot of fun.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's, I mean, it's a really like from a big picture perspective, I have a feeling the episode is going to be more interesting than the book. I'll just make a bold prediction here. But no, because like, so I come at the book from two angles. Like one, I think the world of energy is just fascinating in general. And then the second thing is that, so my background is as a chemical engineer, and a lot of the stuff that he talks about here is basically thermodynamics. And that's like the only real part of chemical engineering I really enjoyed, at least in school. Cool. just being very blunt, like most of the chemi curriculum was not that interesting to me, but the thermo part was really interesting, which is basically the study of energy and the transformation of energy. And that's what he's talking about throughout the book. So, for me, I think it was very interesting from that perspective. But I think the main value of this book, which was encapsulated in that beginning quote that we did in the episode, is that the study of energy is basically the study of humanity and like the progress of humanity and all the things that, I mean, I think there's going to be tie-ins in this episode from Sapiens and into other things we've done, even Scale. I think the previous episode, there's definitely tie-ins. So, yeah, I think the big picture of like the journey of the sort of energy part of humanity, that's where like the really interesting discussion is. He goes into, we were talking about a cross between textbook and narrative nonfiction. Like he does get very deep into the numbers and like, I mean, there's tables of of like different energy. He goes very, very deep. I mean, you don't need all of that for the kind of understanding the big picture and seeing it. But I mean, I think he is an academic, so maybe just out of habit, right? That's like something you'd include in a paper, and he put it in here. And I guess why not? It's there. You can skip it if you don't if you don't need it. But yeah, I think the big picture was where the real interest was, not in like the specific energy equations of feedstock for animals or something.
Right. Well, and I think that the thesis of the book, which you laid out in the opening quote, is really interesting, which is that pretty much like the story of the history of civilization is the story of humans being able to harness more and more energy. Yep. And it's just a very interesting lens to look at the world through of, okay, like wars and like living in different locations and technological development and so many things,
farming
like so many things are either driven by or are driving our like never ending quest for greater harnessing of energy. And kind of like our capacity as humans is a function of the amount of energy we can consume and expend through like secondary means beyond just what our body can do. So we had that example from scale where, what is it, the normal human only needs like 60 watts of electricity basically in their body, which is like a light bulb. But we're now like on average, we're consuming like 10 or 30 times that at any one point in time, just between devices that we're running and like all these other things. And I think it ties in really nicely with this book where it's like, all right, what is that story? How did we go from just using our normal built-in amount of energy to harnessing more and more? And like, what did that mean for our effect on technology, civilization, the world around us, like each other? It's a very interesting way to look at history. And have you read I think it's The Story of Philosophy?
No, I haven't, but that sounds really interesting.
It's pretty good. It's by Will, I can't remember if it's by Will and Ariel or just Will Durant. Like famous.
Okay. I've heard of this book. I have not read it. Yeah. Yep.
It's just interesting because it's like, it's the history of philosophy, but almost told as a narrative and how one philosopher influenced the next one and how that like coincided with major historical events, basically starting with Aristotle. Or Socrates, I guess, until now. And so it's kind of a similar where it's like he's telling the story of civilization through philosophy, and Smil is telling the story of civilization through energy.
Yep.
So
and I think it's also the limit. Like one addition to what you had said is it's also like the limit to growth, essentially, right? It's like at each stage that he's talking about, like the max growth was the amount of energy that could be harnessed was basically the limiting variable. Like even with farming and with, the sort of, fossil fuel era kind of changed a lot of it because you could now harness it is still derived from the sun, but not like in the immediate, right? Like it wasn't derived yesterday from the sun. It's derived like millions of years ago from the sun. But yeah, I mean, we'll get into all that. But the energy, like looking at it, using energy as like the lens through which you view history is kind of what he's doing throughout the book here.
Yeah.
Philosophy one sounds interesting. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, that could be a good one to do sometime too. It's another fairly dense book. I mean, Will and Ariel Durant write like incredible books, but some of them are pretty tough. I mean, I would do, what is it? It's like The Lessons of History, I think.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that one. I haven't read anything by them.
Really?
Yeah, I know it's been like, I think I have multiple books of theirs on my list, but haven't read any of them.
Yeah, Lessons of History is phenomenal. That would be a good one for us to do at some point.
Is it also dense?
No, it's short.
Ooh, okay,
it's
nice.
Like they wrote all of these crazy long history books throughout their career, and then later they wrote this like nice, short, digestible, like from writing all these history books, here are the things that we've learned are like immutable laws of history. So
I feel like that's the one I hear about most too.
Probably because that's the one that most people can actually get through.
Yeah.
I think including myself. All right. Should we dive into some of the stuff in the book?
Let's dive in.
Should we hop into this energy and prehistory section?
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing that jumps out to me here that's pretty neat is humans are almost designed to be energy conservators, because he points out right off the bat that human walking is about 4 times as efficient as quadrupedal and bipedal walking in chimps. So, to cover a set distance, we only need a quarter of as much energy as a chimp walking, which is like kind of crazy, right? It's like,
oh yeah. It's a unique advantage in that that's how we were. I know we talked about this in a previous episode, but it was that's one of the unique advantages for human hunting. Like, we're not faster, than a cheetah or a lion, right? Like, we can't outrun, too many animals really, but we can outlast them.
Like, we can outjog them. Yeah.
Yep.
That must have been in Sapiens, I think, where it's like humans are kind of unique in our ability to dissipate heat, in that we can basically jog forever if we're in good shape. And so even a horse or something we can run down as long as we can keep tracking it, we can eventually exhaust it. There's all these other animals that you hear about being so fast. They're very fast over short distances, but they can't regulate heat the way we can. Like, sweating is a massive advantage that I don't think any other animal can sweat and dissipate heat the way we can. I'm going to fact check myself.
Well, and then you combine that with what we just talked about with using less energy, like the way we walk, our gait is so much more energy efficient. And then you get, that kind of adds to the endurance factor. It probably factors into that as well. Like the fact that we don't use as much energy means we can just keep going where they would run out of energy.
Yeah, exactly.
One thing to take a step back that I thought was crazy, but when I thought about it and looked it up, I was like, oh, that actually is 100% true. There's a quote from Richard Feynman early on in the book where he said, "It is important to realize that in physics today, we have no knowledge of what energy is. We do not have a picture that energy comes in little blobs of a definite amount." And then I don't know if this is part of the Feynman quote, but it says, "What we do know is that all matter is energy at rest, that energy manifests itself in a multitude of ways, and that these distinct energy forms are linked by numerous conversions." So it's like, that's kind of fascinating if you really think about it, right? So everything is energy, right? Equals MC squared.
Right.
And energy is so important to everything, but we don't really, like, it's not like a molecule, right? That like you can, it's very hard to place like what it actually is. Which is kind of wild if you think about it, right? It's like you're saying that everything is this thing, but we don't know what the thing is, which is kind of cool.
Super wild.
Yeah. Anyway, before we kept moving on, I just wanted to bring that one out because I forgot to say.
No. I think it's great. And I fact checked myself while you were bringing that up, and it's true. Humans are the only animal that sweats.
Wow.
It's super interesting.
That's
even
chimps, wild adaptation if you think about it.
Right? Yeah. So pretty much all cooling mammals pant in one way or another, including chimps. So chimps and gorillas both dump body heat by panting. I'm reading this PRI.org article. If anyone else wants to check it out, I'll include it in the show notes. But we're really the only ones who can secrete water to cool ourselves down. And there's actually Smil mentions it in the book too, that a lot of animals lose water to cool themselves down. It's actually part of what panting is doing, is it's getting rid of water to lose heat. And some of the most efficient other animals, like horses, lose water at 100 grams per meter squared, an hourly rate of 100 grams per meter squared of their skin. And camels can lose up to 250 grams per meter squared. But humans can lose water at 500 grams per meter squared, so 5 times as much as horses, with peak rates of 2 kilograms per hour.
You know what's interesting? I wonder if like the success of an endurance athlete is tied to their sweat rate. Like, I wonder,
I'm sure that's part of it.
Yeah. Like a long distance runner or someone who's like in professional, like long distance biker or something. That's got to be part of it.
Yeah, I mean, a big part of what I learned doing the marathon training was that there's kind of this sweet spot for your heart rate where if you can keep it in there, you can basically just keep sweating until you get so dehydrated that you have to stop. And you don't really get more tired. You don't feel like you need to breathe any heavier. You're just like, you're breathing pretty naturally and you're just running. And a lot of your success as an endurance athlete is how fast that pace is for you. And you can increase that pace primarily through like high intensity aerobic activity. So like doing sprints and like forcing yourself to push the pace to an uncomfortable rate on longer runs. But like everyone's sort of got that pace that they can move at a sustained rate at without needing to pant to cool down, right? It's like there's sort of this like panting threshold in running that everyone's body is attuned to. And like for a lot of people, it's basically walking, right? As soon as they start jogging, they're going to be at their panting threshold. But like through a certain amount of training for it, I basically got mine to like 7-ish miles per hour. And so that's like a pretty solid jog. And then I can like do that for the whole marathon. But if I went up to like 7.5 after doing that for 25 minutes, I'd be panting and like tired out. It's crazy how like small of a threshold it might be.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. So you can imagine that like indigenous people who are out running like half marathon to a marathon every day, they can probably get up to like 10 miles an hour and just keep going without panting.
Yeah, especially if that's how you're like getting your food and the motivation. Right?
You're going to starve otherwise. So you're going to get really good at running.
Yeah.
I think there's also got to be an element here of surface area to weight ratio.
Yeah.
Because, and this is something that was talked about in scale, which is, surface area scales linearly with size, but mass and volume scale cubically. And so if you're really overweight, you have a much higher mass and volume for not much more surface area, which means your body can create a lot more heat because there's just like more of you, but you don't have as much space to dissipate that heat because you have a lower surface area to mass ratio. Whereas if you're really lean, you have a greater surface area to dissipate the heat through sweating. And you should be able to keep yourself quite a bit cooler just by being leaner and having a lower mass to surface area ratio. That's kind of an interesting way to think about efficiency there too. It also explains why like all those marathon runners at the Olympics they look, gaunt.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. Yeah. And I guess there's also a whole weight angle to it too. You're just carrying less weight, right? Being smaller, like as small as you can get. But there's probably an ideal, like I don't know. There's probably like an ideal, like you can't be too small. You need to have enough fat to keep the machine going. Right? Yeah. But I guess like a sprinter versus a marathon runner's physique are very, very different.
Yeah. There's just so many cool things here that like make humans really special. It's compared to other things. It's like, what are some of the other ones here?
Well, it's wild, like the adaptations. Like we are the ultimate, definitely the ultimate generalists. Even just you look at like what we can eat, right? And like stay alive on, not saying like what's ideal or what's not ideal, but like we can stay alive on a lot of like a huge variety of foods, And then this sweating adaptation, I had no idea we were the only animal that sweat.
Yeah. The sweating is super cool. There was something here with food too that I'm trying to find. I have a lot of notes from this book.
Me too. Yeah. It was, I think, third on my like using Readwise now, so I can see how many highlights. Yep. I think it's third. I think Laws of Human Nature was ahead of it, and then I forget what the other one was. I'll look. But
so there's this other thing where I guess something else that we're special about is the amount of temporary hydration we can endure. Or dehydration we can endure. So I guess a lot of animals
I remember that. Yeah.
Can't get too dehydrated or they just go into heat shock a lot easier. We can function much better being dehydrated than other animals. So that's kind of neat. And this is the other thing that was in that PCI article I was reading off of before. It seems like a lot of this was probably a evolutionary adaptation to let us hunt in the middle of the day in Africa, right?
Yeah.
It's like if lions and shit can't go out and under the beating sun in the middle of the day to hunt, us being able to is a huge advantage, right?
Yeah.
Like, because we can,
and we don't have to compete with them. Then.
Exactly. We don't have to compete with them, right? We can, get like really like dark sun protective skin, something that basically no other animal has. We can sweat to lose water. We can run basically forever. It's like, even though we don't have any of the claws or teeth, we're sort of the ultimate predator in just our ability to endure, combined with even really rudimentary tool making.
Yeah. Yeah. And we have like the widest, this is like a human brag session, but it's okay. It's good. We should do these more often as a species.
We're all humans. We can all appreciate how awesome we are.
Sorry to any dogs listening to this or other animals. Sorry, we're just better. But yeah, we have the widest number of widest variety of conditions that we can also survive in. Like people survive in the Arctic, right? And like, I mean, it's just insane when you think about like the number of climates. Like you throw a lion into one of those, right? Or not just a lion, but almost any animal you throw into like a climate that's very different from what it's used to, or into a situation that they're not kind of evolved to handle, or like a niche that they're just not built for, and they'll probably not be able to make it. But I don't know, humans just can and part of it, I mean, it's so hard to figure out like what causes what. Like was it the adaptation that allowed us to hunt, which led to the big brains later, right? Like because there is that connection to eating meat and the large brain, development of large brains that they say is, I mean, I don't know if that's proven or not. I forget where we read that, but that was in one of the books. I
think it was in here actually.
Some book somewhere.
It's hard to keep them all straight anymore.
Exactly. But yeah, there's like that whole part. And then, did that like, it's kind of like hard to keep straight, like what led to what, but yeah, it's humans are amazing.
Yeah. Well, and there's kind of this funny, I guess not funny, but sort of unfortunate or interesting.
That's a big difference.
Yeah. It's just like, we're so good that we basically made every non-predator megafauna extinct no matter where we showed up. Right. Like he mentions here that late Pleistocene hunters may have become so skillful that hunting was largely or even completely responsible for the rapid disappearance of basically all of the late Paleolithic megafauna. So any animal with a body mass greater than 50 kilograms. Like I don't know if this would be a great time for us to...
I don't know if that's proven though.
I feel like that's a theory. There could be other reasons too.
I mean, it absolutely contributed. It would be shocking if it didn't contribute to it. But yeah, I don't know if that was...
it. I mean, you hear about what happened with like the buffalo and stuff in the U.S. when people started coming over.
Although you could say before that, right? The Native Americans kept them there for a long time. Yeah, so it's not all humans.
Right.
Or like that. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. How long were the Native Americans there before hunting buffalo? Was it like thousands of years, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of debate on this. The last date I heard was like 13,000 years. I know we found some like remnant tools from 13 or 16,000 years ago.
Wow.
But I think there's like a lot of debate about this. It's sort of like the whole Göbekli Tepe, like was there a big flood? Like that whole ongoing debate about what exactly happened in that. I can't remember if I think it's like 16,000 years ago, 13,000 BC, but we have to fact check that. It's like what exactly happened around that period, because there's a lot of weird stuff that lines up then.
And climate stuff too.
Yeah. I guess what's the theory that there might have been like an asteroid that hit somewhere in the Arctic that melted a huge glacier that then basically flooded like almost everywhere.
And that's what led to like the consistent flood.
The consistent flood myth. Yeah, that you see in so many different societies. I mean, like even Plato was writing about like a flood myth in Republic. It's like it's kind of all over.
There's a flood myth in like ancient Hinduism stuff too, which is wild because that's a whole nother part of the world. And you have the same
Christianity.
Same story. Yeah,
there's like some like drawings or images or something depicting it in like South America, or I could be making that one up. I know that there's like it shows up in a lot of places.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like, I mean, the megafauna one, it wouldn't surprise me because we'll get into this, but like the energy density of that, make one kill, you probably feed your clan for
you're good to go
months. Yeah. it's like the equivalent of like you make a massive sale, right, and your like company is cash flow set for a while.
Right.
It's the same idea, right? But it's like so on one hand, I can definitely see humans, if they see like, a herd of these megafauna and they're easy enough to kill, you're like, okay, let's just go nuts on this. We're not touching any other kind of food. Like, this is all we're going to be going after. So I could see that on one hand, right? Like, we're all wired that way too.
I mean, that's such a crazy thing about how much more energy efficient hunting was compared to gathering.
Oh, yes. Let's talk about this. That is, So I think on one episode, you and I, when carnivore was like just coming up, I remember we talked about it and we were like, it doesn't make sense. And then like, I think it was you. I don't know if it wasn't you, correct me. But I think you had tweeted at one point, you were saying that like, maybe the ability to eat other things other than meat was like an adaptation for what happened between kills or like between hunts. And like you could survive for longer if you could eat these other things, but you were still going after the kill, like the meat. And I don't know if that's true, but like the hunting part, it is incredible when you look at the energy density, like how much more energy there is, in just animals versus, I mean, he has that whole table, right, with like the low density fruits and vegetables,
right?
And basically anything that's not a grain it was very hard to survive just on that.
Yeah, if you're like picking berries or something.
Yeah, he has like the prickly pear example that he gives, right?
Yeah, I don't have that in front of me. Do you have it?
I have it somewhere here. Is that what you were looking for?
It's just something to that effect. I've got the notes on the energy content of meat, but yeah, go ahead.
Yep, I got it. Yeah, so it's talking about, for example, the pre-Hispanic inhabitants of the basin of Mexico always ate plenty of prickly pears, which were easy to gather from the many species of cacti. But as with most fruits, pear's pulp is overwhelmingly about 88% water, with less than 10% carbohydrates, 2% protein, and 0.5% lipids, and has an energy density of just 1.7 megajoules per kilogram. This means that even a small woman surviving only on carbohydrates of cactus pears, assuming unrealistically virtually no need for the other macronutrients, would have to eat 5 kilograms of this fruit every day. But she could get the same amount of energy from only about 650 grams of ground corn consumed as tortillas.
Yeah.
That's just grain to fruit, but yeah, it's.
And then you add in meat.
Can you imagine eating 5 kilograms of a fruit?
Well, this was sort of like a big thing about why we were able to, or supposedly why we were able to develop such large brains. It's like chimps need to eat for hours and hours a day because they're eating so much like just plant matter that it takes like a long time to digest, right? Like you look at a cow, it basically has to chew all day. That's the only thing a cow does. Whereas it's like if we're eating a kind of like meat and fat heavy diet, you can get your 2,000 calories in like 10 minutes if you want to.
Yeah. And also like the size of guts too. Like you look at a gorilla, right? Like gorillas are like their size of their stomachs are huge, but that's because they're eating only plant. Like I think gorillas only eat plant matter, right? Gorillas don't eat. I
believe
chimps eat some meat, but gorilla, like they largely eat plant matter, but gorillas I think are right. Are gorillas vegetarian?
They will. They'll eat like termites and ants and stuff.
Okay,
they'll mostly eat plants, bamboo shoots, fruit.
Oh yeah, they do. I see this. Yeah, they do eat termites and ants.
I love all these questions, or like I love this like ridiculous logic. It's like, well, if gorillas are so strong, maybe we should just eat plants too. It's like it's a different stomach system. It's so funny. I think that was in that What the Health documentary, right? It's like,
man, yeah.
If you look at a bull and a bull is like so strong and all it's eating is plants, like why do we need to eat meat? It's like
because you don't have the stomach.
You don't have a fucking 4-chamber stomach. Yeah. Like, do you also want to have to throw up your food and re-chew it so that you can digest it?
4 times or 3 times.
Yeah, 3 or 4 times. Like, no. But if you want to stand around and chew grass all day, like I've got a great backyard for you.
Yeah. But yeah, he has like this whole chart of the energy densities of of different foods. And so it's I'm on the page right now. It's on density in megajoules per kilogram. So vegetables and fruits are between 0.8 to 2.5 megajoules per kilogram. Tubers, which are like potatoes, sweet potatoes, that type of stuff, and milk he has in the same category, or the low category. It's 2.5 to 5. Mm-hmm. Then he has meat, which is between 5 and 12. I'm guessing like chicken and like lean meat is probably on the lower end, and like higher fat stuff is 12. Then he has higher than meat is actually cereals and legume grains, which are 12 to 15. And then, animal fats is actually separate. So oils and animal fats are, those are 25 to 35. So meats is probably just muscle meat.
And then like a lot of game meat.
Right. Yeah. Which is super lean anyway.
Yeah. I think there's something where if you only ate game meat, you would actually die, because there's something with like what is the reasoning for it? But like, it's so lean and there's not enough fat that, hold on.
Like, are you talking about like rabbits and stuff? Like if you were just eating like super lean game meat, or just all game meat in general is super lean like that?
Well, pretty much all game meat is super lean, but there is something where it's so lean that if you only ate that, your body would be like still missing some essential nutrients.
Got it.
Hold on. We're going to fact check myself here, because
I feel like I've heard that too. I just don't know if that like.
Oh, you know what? All right. Let's see. You can still die of starvation. Here we go. So, but you know what? I'm also seeing a fact check on Wikipedia, and it seems like it may not be true. See, this is good. This is like, we're saving ourselves from having to like apologize for getting things wrong later by just fact checking ourselves in real time. Here we go. Protein poisoning refers to an unverified acute form of malnutrition that some have speculated may be caused by a diet deficient in fat where excess lean meat is consumed. Speculation was associated with eating rabbit meat, which is very lean. There's speculation that other low-fat game meats could cause the same phenomena. Speculated that eating fat may relieve the reported syndrome, but there's basically no verification this is a real thing. Cool. All right. Now we know. Go crazy on the game meat, y'all.
And just for comparison, like with the previous numbers, crude oil is 40 to 44 on that. So it's, oils and animal fats are just a notch below crude oil, but they're pretty high up there.
Well, it's kind of like this is always the surprising thing when you start putting more fat in your diet. Protein and carbs only have 4 calories per gram, but then fat has 9.
Yep.
So if you've got, a pound of fat versus a pound of protein or a pound of carbs, like the pound of fat has more than double the number of calories.
Yeah.
Even though it might feel like you're eating the same amount, you're actually getting twice as much energy from it.
Yeah.
So those really fatty cuts of meat, like he gives this example here that since salmon has a really high fat content, it has an energy density of 9.1 megajoules per kilogram, which is 3 times that of cod.
Yep.
So
and
I think it looks like the same fish, but the salmon has way more calories in it.
Exactly. And I think like just going back to like big picture look on this is like it sounds cool and interesting for us to talk about this right now. But if you think about somebody having to survive right in a scenario where they can't just go to the grocery store or like order something from Uber Eats, right? If they're not able to get enough food, this was literally survival. So that I'm not saying people were sitting around doing the math of like, oh, it's going to cost me this much energy to farm this particular fruit, right? Versus, go hunting. They weren't necessarily doing the math, but their choices had to be energy positive, right? Like I think there's a quote somewhere that in the where do I have it here? Okay, let's see. Okay. So here we go. So it says net energy returns in every traditional agriculture relying solely on animate power, so animals, had to be considerably greater than 1. So he has this ratio, right? So like basically energy returns over energy cost to get that, get that energy return. And it had to be considerably greater than 1. Edible harvests had to contain more energy than the amount consumed as food and feed needed not only by people and animals producing those crops, but also by their non-working dependents. an insurmountable problem arises when we try to compare energy returns in traditional agricultures that were powered solely by animate energies and hence involved only transformations of recently received solar radiation. So what animals eat and humans eat was kind of derived from the sun in the immediate time frame, with those in modern farming, which is subsidized directly and indirectly by fossil fuels. So for field operations, for fertilizers and pesticides, and then to build farm machinery. So it says that actually in modern day agriculture versus traditional agriculture, the modern day one has lower energy returns than traditional cropping if you try to balance them out from that perspective, like you factor in the fossil fuels. I think that's the sense that, or that's what he was kind of saying there.
Yeah. And it's also just amazing. Like, yeah, I mean, as we got better at hunting, we were able to eat more and more energy dense foods by being able to, harvest more of them, which meant we could spend less and less time on the actual like collecting food part of our days and like spend more of it on tool making and getting in fights on Twitter.
Exactly. Well, I think this also answered for me I don't want to call it a mystery because it's not really a mystery, but like it is in some ways, like the mystery of why farming started and why grains in particular, right? Like grains are just so energy dense compared to like, let's say you were, foraging for berries, right? Like that's not going to cut it. With foraging for berries is like, you're getting a nice bonus on top of the meat that you're finding. Grains. And you can see why societies have been built on grains. Even if it's, not necessarily the best thing for you, but it's just such a dense energy product. And that's consistent and, in a lot of ways predictable versus hunting. Like, I think he has a quote somewhere in here and I didn't highlight this one. Maybe I did. No, I did. Okay. Yeah. So, I had written a note to myself that reliability is an underrated, human motivator. So he has something here in the book. Compared to foraging, early farming usually required higher human energy inputs. I'm guessing, so farming versus foraging, but it could support higher population densities and provide a more reliable food supply. Because you were sort of in control, virtually in control. I mean, you're not in control of the weather and other problems that can come about with farming, but it probably felt more reliable. And then it was fairly energy dense, maybe not as dense as like a high fat meat diet, but definitely more dense than apples.
Well, there's another level to that argument too that I heard recently, which is that pasturing, it's like domesticated animals, are really the most reliable one, because you could lose like an entire crop to bad weather or bad irrigation or pests or something. But it's much harder to lose an entire like herd of cows or or like collection of pigs. And the nice thing with animals is you can sort of harvest them whenever you want, whereas
that's a great point.
Grains have to be harvested basically when they're ready, and then you have to hope they don't like spoil in the cellar. But if you've got tons of pigs, you can just like harvest one whenever you need another one.
Was that in this book? I forget if it was in this book or something else that I was reading. I think it was in this book where he's talking about how little work is needed by like shepherds, right? Like you can have two shepherds. Yeah, I was in here, right?
I don't know. I can't remember if it was in here. I've heard that. It was
something else I was reading, but it was basically like two shepherds can easily kind of handle. I forget. Is it like is it a herd? No, it's not a herd, right? It's a flock.
Flock,
right?
Yeah.
No, is it a flock? I don't know. Whatever. It's like it can handle like hundreds of animals with two people, and it's largely downtime in that job, right? So it's like very energy efficient. To your point, like you can manage hundreds of animals with two people. And to your point too, you can kill them whenever you need them. Yeah, that's actually a good point.
All right, we should probably move on to a new chapter because
I know we're like spending all our time
on through
farming.
The first one, and we're like almost an hour into recording. Classic us move.
I know.
All right, so there's one thing in the traditional farming section I wanted to call out because I thought this was so cool. Is like that graph of animal energy efficiency and how like horses are these perfectly designed animals for working. Mostly because they've got 3/5 of their weight in the front of their body and only 2/5 in the back. So they can actually get a much greater pulling efficiency than like cattle and ox and like donkeys that are normally also used on a farm. I thought that was just super neat, where it's like, horses are almost like, secondary to humans in terms of being designed for incredible energy efficiency.
Yeah. Yeah. No. And then it's also super interesting how horses were not in sort of North and South America for a long time. Right. Yeah. And they somehow, maybe that's why they didn't come up with the wheel. Like, I think horses pulled a lot of wheeled, like, that was somewhere in here too, but I'm not going to spend the time looking for it because it's going to take another couple of minutes. But yeah, I feel like, to your point, like horses are basically the perfect, like partner to humans in farming, at least.
It makes sense why you like see them as such like a co-adapted animal with humans throughout history. I think the note on dogs was kind of cool too, where it's basically like dogs kind of co-evolved with us, and we literally like adapted their stomach to eating grain so that they could live with us.
Oh, like, yeah.
Wolves can't digest grain, but domesticated dogs can. And have you seen that thing about like people are like basically giving their dogs heart disease by feeding them grain-free diets?
Grain-free diets?
Yeah. So this is like a whole thing in the pet industry right now, where basically like a lot of, and they were totally well-meaning pet food companies said, okay, going paleo is like all the rage for humans. People should do that for their dogs too, because, like obviously dogs aren't supposed to eat grains and things like that. And it's like, well, no, they are. That's like part of how dogs evolved from wolves is by adapting to eat grains. And so they started making all of these grain-free dog foods with all these other fillers in them that dogs literally would never have eaten, like these fake pea proteins and things like that. And so, if you have a dog and you're on one of these grain-free dog foods, I would look it up, because a lot of them have been named in like this big class action lawsuit / like recall, where it's sort of like, no, these foods are actually killing dogs. Like, this is really bad.
I would not have thought that. Wow, that makes sense though. That makes sense after that.
And it's not that they need grains to be healthy. It's that when they took out grains, they put in all this other shit that's like way worse for them, and now they're getting sick. Dogs are totally fine eating a certain amount of grain, which is like kind of wild. It's sort of like, when there's the whole fat-free craze for humans, it's like, no, this is way worse.
This is really stupid.
Like, obviously high fructose corn syrup is better for you than animal fat. Like,
I can't believe, like, looking back, I wonder, I feel like we're getting better at it. I don't know. Maybe it's the arrogance of the present, right? The like,
man, a lot of people still drink like skim milk. And I'm just like, so you took out the part of the milk that has all of the good healthy things, and you just have sugar water.
Yeah, like sounds like the standard American diet, though.
Yeah, pretty much.
Should be. Yeah, I don't get it. It's almost. There's a whole episode. I wish there's I wonder if there is a good book on this, but like. It really does show the it's like human hubris, right? Like we're like, oh, we're smarter now. We can come up with better. Like the margarine is always my favorite one.
I think
it's like butter was fine. Butter was fine. Why do we gotta mess with it?
We conquered all of these other simple things like transportation and shelter. And so we just assumed that we knew nutrition as well, and that we could outsmart nature there. And that one's just not true. we have no idea really how it works. So I feel like the best we can do is just throw up our hands and say, okay, we're just going to try to eat what we've always been eating, and like call it a day there.
And I think the only way that changes is if, and this is at the very end of the book, and he doesn't go too much into it because it's not really his area, but I think he has a quote like, where this is all leading is like the end of like carbon-based life form as being like the human substrate or something. Right?
Yeah,
it's like where we're
almost like a little Homo Deus-y.
Yeah. I don't know. It's somewhere in here. Whatever. It's not his. Like he only had like a throwaway little section on it, but it's not because it's not his area of expertise. But I feel like that's the only way that what we just said it becomes not true. Right? Is if like the human, because right now, like fundamentally, this is the whole argument behind the paleo diet is like. And I'm not saying like, okay, go follow that diet, but the argument is that we haven't had that much time to evolve to sort of modern foods. And we're the same body more or less than what we were thousands of years ago, at least. and that's like the argument behind it. But I feel like what he's saying in that sort of little section at the end was that if we're not the same type of body, well, then everything kind of goes out the window of what we know about nutrition. Right. But I don't think we're that close to that. I mean, hey, who knows? Maybe Elon Musk and Neuralink and all that will come sooner than we think. But I would be surprised.
Yeah,
I would be surprised. All right, shall we move beyond
prime movers and fuels?
Yeah. Hold on, I had a quote.
Chapter 4.
Yeah.
I mean, this there wasn't honestly like a ton in this chapter. It was just like, here's all these different kinds of energy, which is kind of cool. I mean, like, so there's a few things that were sort of neat in here, right? Like, obviously, gunpowder was huge. Water power was really interesting. I hadn't thought about what a big deal water power was, but he makes this point that like a single windmill or water mill, kind of like either, that could help process flour.
Yep.
So he says a single mill would have produced enough flour in a 10-hour shift to feed 2,500 to 3,000 people, which is crazy. You just put one mill by the river and you can feed like 3,000 people, assuming you have enough wheat for all of them. Like, that's pretty impressive.
Pretty impressive, yeah.
That's a crazy amount of output. And can you imagine, I mean, how much that's got to be? So 3,000 people, and we assume 2,000 calories a day, so we're looking at 6 million calories from wheat. So we've got 6 million, and then we're dividing that by 4, so we're at 1.5 million grams of wheat over 10 hours. So 150,000 grams of wheat per hour. Like, how many people would that take, right?
That's, I mean, but that's still
in a pound.
Yeah, but also 36. The energy is being provided for that via water, right?
Yeah, by the just from the water running,
which is super. I mean, that's awesome.
Yeah.
There's also, I think, a section in here related that says nearly all traditional societies could produce heat and light only by burning biomass fuels, which I thought was pretty interesting if you think about it, right? It's like crop residues, tree branches, right? So wood. It says woody phytomass, charcoal derived from that, dried dung, which I thought was a pretty interesting one. And I've definitely like seen and heard that before, that throughout the world, that was another. And I think they even talked about it in America, right? Like buffalo dung made the continental crossings possible.
Right. It was like a very
called it buffalo
fuel.
wood. Yeah.
So funny.
Yeah. But I think it goes back to like, you just kind of use like what you have. Like, yeah, okay, there's fuel in there, so you gotta use it, right? If you don't have much choice,
exactly.
What else are you gonna do? So it's pretty interesting from that perspective. I didn't realize charcoal was that old. I don't know how old I thought it was, but I didn't realize that it was literally the kind of the reason we were able to melt iron.
Yeah. Does he give a date? I don't have one in my notes here.
I don't have one in my notes either, but I'm back on the page. Let's see. I don't see a date on here.
Either way, it is kind of interesting because it's also like, that's such a great example of being just really efficient with resources.
Yep.
Or it's like, oh, this wood already burned, and now we can just like use the burned wood to do more burning.
Yeah, but also get to temperatures to nearly, it says 2,000 degrees Celsius, which is by using bellows, like blowing air, using a supplementary air supply. It says combustion could produce temperatures on its own of 900 degrees Celsius, but with a supplemental air supply, achieved most efficiently by using bellows, could be raised to nearly 2,000 degrees Celsius, more than enough to melt even iron ores.
That's
pretty
super
cool.
Neat.
Yeah. So I thought that was really interesting. I don't know why I didn't realize charcoal was there since that long ago, but I thought that was interesting that they had that. Let me see. Let me just look this up because it's kind of curious.
There's some other just like really interesting things in here while you look that up. Like he mentions this. There's like a temple in southern Peru, Ollantaytambo, I believe. So they've got these like 140 ton stones up at this temple, and pulling that up a ramp would have required about 2,400 men to move it. And then there's a sort of open question of like, okay, well, how do you get 2,000 men to like harness to pull at the same time, right? How does that even make sense? And how could they fit into the confines of a 6 to 8 meter ramp that the Incans used? Like, there's just all of these really interesting questions.
Yeah.
Or he's got another one of people in ancient Brittany. There's some 340 ton stone erected in this like old ancient European society. And we just like have no answers for how some of these things were done, which I think is kind of crazy. It's like, okay, well, aliens is not the obvious answer here, right? Like they either had more advanced technology for this stuff than we assumed they had, or they had some clever like physical world hacks that we just have forgotten how to do or don't know how to do because we have technology that answers these questions for us now. I just find that stuff so interesting.
I feel like forgotten knowledge is definitely a real thing. Like there's a lot of that. Yeah. Especially because when you consider like the even with, let's say, I mean, this is going to be a silly example, but just bear with me. Imagine something happens to our society, right? And all of our assume all of our information is on hard drives, let's say, right? And those hard drives don't get destroyed. But unless like the next society also invents hard drives, right? How would they ever read what's on those hard drives? Like they would have no idea that they would just be like, oh, what are these like bricks that they have? Or these like squares that they had, right? And that's like something that's as sturdy as a hard drive. Imagine if everything was oral tradition, right? Like it's gone. It's gone when that society is gone. And so, like I feel like there's probably a lot of stuff. I mean, I have no proof besides, these interesting questions that he brings up, but
that's why some of the like Great Flood speculation is so interesting, because if there was some huge flood that wiped out like 80% of people and, emptied out a lot of these ancient like pre-civilization civilizations, right? Like you don't need to have crazy advanced technology speculation to just recognize that, okay, if a huge number of people died and if there was a predominantly oral tradition, then we would have lost most of that knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Or they could have been using some kind of paper, right? It's like the reason we don't have like the reason we don't have notes from like Phoenicians and stuff is that they were using a sort of papyrus that just didn't last, right? It wasn't that they weren't recording stuff. It's just they weren't putting it in stone.
Have you ever seen in like an old, like if you go to, like grandparents' house or something like that, and there's like books from 50 years ago, they don't look like they're in good shape. And that's only 50 years.
Yeah. I've got a book print from the 1800s and it's like barely keeping it together.
Yep. Right? Yep. So, and that's 1800s. So when you start thinking like 2000 BC or something.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
it's not let alone 13,000.
Right. Right. And I found an article, going back to charcoal, I found an article from McGill University in Canada. So I don't know if we can trust it. Just kidding, Canadians. I just put it in the chat. We'll put it in the show notes. It says that the fact that charcoal burns better than wood was probably noted soon after man learned to control fire over 1 million years ago. The first use of charcoal for purposes other than providing heat was around 30,000 BC when cavemen used it as a pigment for drawing on the walls of caves. So it's been around for a long time. I did not realize that. That's pretty cool.
It's pretty cool. There's just like a lot of random little neat tidbits in this section about like energy.
Oh, I thought one thing that was interesting, and I guess this was the last thing in my notes from this section, but it was saying cooking required relatively little heat energy in East Asian stir frying and steaming. In contrast, considerable fuel inputs were needed for baking bread, the staple throughout the rest of the Old World, and for roasting, done commonly in the Middle East, Europe, and Africa. I thought that was interesting because I guess that makes sense when you think about it, right? Like stir frying doesn't take much time or energy.
Yeah, it's quick and requires a smaller flame because you're cooking more directly on the fire, whereas baking is a lot of like area heat. You need to heat a much larger area in order, and you want to like keep it consistent.
Yep.
So, makes sense. Yeah. Oh, the last thing in here that's kind of interesting is thinking about how much forest cities required.
Yeah, that was cool. That was kind of related to scale.
Yeah, it was very related to scale, whereas basically like a city could only get as large as the surrounding forest that it could draw energy from until we figured out other sources of fuel, which is like kind of interesting. And he mentioned it a little bit in the intro too, and I think that description was a little bit snappier, so I'm going to find it, where he said, oh yeah, here we go. The power density of sustainable annual tree growth in temperate climates is at best equal to 2% of the power density of energy consumption for traditional urban heating, cooking, and manufactures. So cities had to draw on nearby areas at least 30 times their size for fuel supply. So if you wanted to have like a 10-acre city, you needed 300 acres of forest to sustain it. Kind of neat.
Which is a lot. Yeah, but that's a lot.
It's not a small area.
Yeah.
And like 10 acres is a fairly small area. I mean, that's like, I mean, how much is a block in a city? Like, how many acres is a block?
Is it even one? Might not even be.
City blocks are typically 2.2 to 2.5 acres.
Okay.
So
it's 4 blocks.
I mean, yeah. I mean, if you,
so
10 acres is 4 blocks. So you need 300 acres of forest to sustain 4 blocks of ancient energy.
Yeah. So you need, exactly. Wow.
It's kind of crazy.
Yeah. It makes sense then that like, I don't know, just in what I picture a city in the past, like, that type of past to be, like a feudal, like medieval times type of city. Like, I don't know. I don't picture them being too close together. Right. No. And I think that they couldn't be like by definition. Yeah. By definition, they couldn't be. And we live in good times with fossil fuels, like, and maybe, maybe moving on from fossil fuels, but we live in good times comparatively.
It's also, I read this funny thing or I guess it was a while ago. It was sort of like, it's kind of interesting that all of the quote unquote renewable energy sources, or like all of the renewable things in the world. So like, animals, like whales or a lot of plant life and things like those are all going extinct and disappearing. But the non-renewables like oil and rare earth metals and stuff don't actually seem to be running out. And we keep finding more and more of them.
Yeah, we're finding new techniques to squeeze more out. Like,
it's like, remember when fracking was a thing and then we just found so much more oil that we basically didn't need to do it anymore?
Yeah. And then like the oil sand stuff. I don't know if you've ever seen that in Canada.
I haven't seen that.
So I think there's 2 major fields. There's one in Alberta and then I don't know where the other one is, somewhere in South America. I think Brazil somewhere, or somewhere in South America. I don't want to say Brazil, but those are like the 2 major ones. They basically, I don't know exactly how they do it, but they're able to extract oil out of this particular sand that's up there. And there's a lot of it. It's like so much so that, I'm going to just Google how much is the Alberta oil sands.
Also, side note on oil, just in case anybody else was like me and thought that oil mostly came from dead animals, like most of it comes from dead plants. I didn't realize that until embarrassingly recently. I feel like you always had that image growing up of like, oh, you're like using dead dinosaurs to power your car. It's like, no, you're mostly using like dead trees and stuff.
It's just a cooler picture.
It's a much cooler image. Yeah.
So Alberta's oil sands, they haven't fully tapped it, but Alberta's oil sands is the 3rd largest proven oil reserve in the world after Venezuela and Saudi Arabian oil fields. Alberta oil sands proven reserves equal to about 165.4 billion barrels of oil.
Jeez.
Max production so far, I think, was 2.8 million barrels per day. That was in 2017, and it's gone down since then. But yeah, it's like
you said there were 100 billion gallons or 100 billion barrels.
165.4 billion. Yeah.
And wait, they were doing 2 million barrels a day
at its max, but then they slowed it down.
Holy shit! Can you imagine the infrastructure you need?
That's what I was thinking. Yep.
2 million barrels a day.
Wild, right?
That's insane.
Yeah, it's insane. I mean, it's the thing that, to your point about how the non-renewables keep getting like discovered, it's not obviously that more oil is being like created at that pace. It's just that there is a lot of oil out there. And I guess there's some type of technique that they developed to extract oil from sand, from this particular type of sand. And the oil is there. It's just in small amounts on each individual, bit of sand, I guess. And there's they're able to pull it off and purify it.
Dude, I just did the math. At that 2.3 million rate, they could do that for over 200 years.
Wow. That is insane.
It sounds like so much, but compared to the 160 billion available, and like I just I feel like our minds have a hard time doing the math at those numbers.
I can't. I was thinking, I'm like, oh, it's probably like 20 years or something, right? Like,
yeah, 200 years at 2 million barrels a day, 7 days a week. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah, it just like, I mean, the other thing that there's some accounts that I follow on Twitter, like ever since I read the prize book, just because they're interesting. Like they talk about the oil industry, and it's really interesting, the narrative versus like the facts on the ground. And I think, and I'm not somebody who I actually really do believe in renewables, and I went on like a rant the other day about nuclear. Like I do think there's better ways to do things than we do them right now. Right. But one thing I found out through these Twitter accounts is like the demand for oil is not falling. It's not only the growth not only hasn't stopped, it's projected to continue to like at least 2050. The worldwide oil, like they need more oil next year, every year till like 2050 at least. Yeah. Like that's what they've projected out to. And it's not because the US and like Europe, it's mostly because the rest of the world is urban. I mean, not just urbanizing, but industrializing and in general, actually, when you take a step back, like, okay, obviously climate change is a major issue, but when you take a step back, that also is directly tied to these, millions and actually billions of people not being in poverty anymore. Like those are directly tied together. Because if you look back at, I mean, even just the chapter we were just talking about, the farming chapter, and we were just saying how blessed we are right now, in large part, that's because we can harness more energy, which is derived from fossil fuels in the, from the majority of it, at least right now. And it's like the rest of the world is kind of like, okay, but we hopefully can do that too. And they want to do that.
That was an interesting criticism I heard of the US being so hard on China polluting the atmosphere so much when it was going through some of its more industrial revolution, where it's kind of like, oh, so it's fine for the US to heavily pollute the atmosphere for 100 years while we go through industrialization, but now like China's not allowed to do it to catch up. Like some of these, it might just be a necessary phase in development, right? And like, hopefully at some point we can find a way to help other countries like skip that step and go straight to renewable energy.
And things might be getting, like the techniques.
I think we're getting closer to that. Yeah.
Well, and things are definitely cleaner now in terms
that
of
too.
Versus like 100 years ago, right? In terms of even just like coal to oil or coal to natural gas, that shift is massive.
Dude, I heard a crazy theory the other day that like, it's not actually that crazy of a theory. It's a very interesting theory, which is that a lot of the like crime and like primarily crime that happened in the US in the late 1900s was partially influenced by lead poisoning from living in the cities where cars were using leaded gasoline, because like there was something where like mother's breast milk had like more lead than the acceptable amount in like store-bought milk. And like everybody was so poisoned with lead from cars belching it into the atmosphere that they were actually getting like neurological damage from it, and like mania and other things that would actually lead to a lot of the crime that happened in cities around that time. And then if you track when like the crime decreased, it kind of tracks with 18 years following when lead was taken out of gasoline and it stopped being pumped into like everyone's homes in big cities. It's like a super interesting idea, right? But it kind of fits with what you were just saying about like cleanliness, right? Like we've gotten a little bit better at using gasoline without, totally destroying ourselves in the process.
Have you ever seen that study around Easy Pass and low birth weight and premature birth? Have you ever seen that? No, you haven't seen this? Okay, hold on. I just pulled it up. And this isn't the full article, but you can at least see the full article is somewhere out there. But this was like, you can see the little abstract. So it says, exploit the introduction of electronic toll collection, E-ZPass, which greatly reduced both traffic congestion and vehicle emissions near highway toll plazas. We show that the introduction of E-ZPass reduced prematurity and low birth weight among mothers within 2 kilometers of the toll plaza by 10.8% and 11.8%, respectively, relative to mothers 2 to 10 kilometers from a toll plaza.
Oh my gosh, that's so interesting. So the idea is
it's the same idea. It's the same idea.
Yeah, their air is less polluted because the cars aren't spending as much time near them.
Yep.
And so they're having, I mean, it makes sense, right? Yeah. Like I have an air purifier in my house now after seeing how bad the air can get here. And I think we're going to install a whole house water purifier too, just because
makes sense. Yeah.
There's like so much shit in the water that in tiny amounts isn't so bad, but over time can really build up and is obviously not great
in
for
Texas, you guys had some like brain eating, like
oh yeah, the like brain eating. That was just in the lake, thankfully.
Okay.
So like, we're not.
I saw
drinking
the
lake
headline.
water,
I had no idea if it was real, but
yeah. I don't think it actually got into anyone's like drinking water in their house. Good. But we've had like a bunch of dogs have died from swimming at the lake here. Actually.
Oh wow! Just really from sad. Like contaminants or something, or some
from
bacteria?
Like that bacteria stuff. Yeah.
Oh wow!
We don't really know what's causing it, but they basically just tell you not to let your dog swim in Austin anymore because it's been such a big issue.
Damn. But yeah, it's like going back. It's like. The analogy that I like to think of is, and I don't know if this is just my like opinion or not even opinion. This is like my thought process right now, is that maybe fossil fuels are necessary to develop like escape velocity or something, right? Yeah. So you like develop your technology, your society to a point where you're in a position to develop renewable energy, right? Mm-hmm. Like, or something like that, right? Because there is, I mean, and people. I know people use this argument disingenuously, so I'm not trying to use it that way. But like you have to admit, in solar panels, like solar panels don't just appear. Like there's a lot of stuff that goes into them,
yeah,
and a lot of that is derived from fossil fuels. Still, like the rare earth minerals. You can't mine 7 miles below the Earth's surface on solar energy yet. Maybe you can at some point, but it's going to be very difficult to do it.
There's still kind of a bad deal, like. They came with our house, so we have them. But if I had the choice of adding them, I wouldn't. It's like $10,000 to save $100 a month.
Yeah, that doesn't really
makes no sense at all.
Yeah.
But hopefully that technology continues to advance to a point where it does make sense. And I think there would be other cases where, like, if we were in a situation where oil were a lot more expensive, it would make more sense and things like that. But we're still not at the point where it's a no-brainer.
And I think the other issue, and I think what I started saying before, and then of course we went on a tangent, is how the narrative and the reality don't really match up right now. And I think so. Obviously, at least when we're doing this recording, energy stocks are way down, and like people say it's like, oh, because the world is moving to renewable and all this. And I think to some extent that's true. Like if you view the stock market as like a forward-looking mechanism, which is arguable, but but if that is the case, right, like. You can definitely see that argument holding weight. But I think the sort of underrated narrative that isn't being talked about as much is what we were talking about earlier, like let's say the Alberta oil sands, right? There's all these sources of oil that we just keep finding. Like there's just a glut there's just so much oil, right? So it's like, if you just look at a price of anything, when you get a huge supply glut, the price tends to come down. And if a company is built and the infrastructure that they built, the way that oil companies build infrastructure, which is really interesting, is they do these like multi-billion-dollar projects and then they amortize them over, whatever number of years in the future. But they do the upfront cost. So those infrastructure projects that they do require oil being above a certain price for it to sort of pay for itself. And when you have a supply glut like that, right, like the price falls below that, and then the companies are in trouble. But it's not that people aren't using oil, right? It's like, if you just look at the headlines, at least maybe the headlines I see, you get the sense of like, okay, well, everybody's moving to renewable. We're not using oil anymore. And like, we're not going to ever use oil again after like 5 years from now. And like, okay, yes, as the US is using less, the rest of the world is just using, more. And it doesn't mean that oil is going away in the short term. In my opinion, the price thing has been more because of of course I'm not an expert on this, but like I suspect that plays a huge role. Like the math that you just did, the math that you just did, right? Like they could run that plant or that field at full capacity for 200 plus years before it was depleted. And they probably would come up with other techniques in that meantime to extract more from that same area.
Well, and the US doesn't punish using oil the same way like other countries do. I mean, in Texas, I can go get a gallon of gas for my truck for like $1.70 a gallon.
Probably less than a gallon of milk.
Yeah, it actually is. It's $1.70 a gallon. It costs me like $25 to fill it up. It's wild.
I mean, I think I've seen actually really interesting work done even by like renewables people on Twitter. They were talking about how like there has to be a balance, right? And like the journey to renewable. And I think California was the example they were giving. And, I think the blackouts they had recently, right, of how like, I think they've had some sort of top-down mandates around using renewables. And there was some disruption to that. I don't know exactly what the disruption was, or there was a demand spike that was bigger than what they were expecting. And they were saying it's actually not a technical issue for those blackouts. Like if they were allowed to use, I think they're saying natural gas plants that they already have there. If they were allowed to use those to sort of be like the backstop, you wouldn't have those blackouts. Like they wouldn't be a problem. But I think it's like a regulation issue that they're not allowed to. So I know this person at least was talking, I got to find who this was, but this person was talking about like viewing it more as like a transition rather than like a light switch. Like you don't go from fossil fuel to no fossil fuel, right? You go from fossil fuel to like mix, and then you reduce the mix and keep reducing the mix until you're like, 100% confident you're not going to have those types of issues. But the great thing about fossil fuels is like and that's what he talks about a lot in the book, is like they can be used like whenever. You're not dependent on the sun necessarily, right? You're not dependent on day-night cycles, wind.
Don't need batteries.
Can be transported fairly easily because not natural gas, but like oil is liquid. So it's fairly easy to transport.
Super dense. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So there's like a lot of advantages to it. And I mean, of course, because like we can't, of course, like climate change is definitely an issue. And I think everybody knows like where we need, not everybody, but you know what I mean? A lot of people know where we need to get, but you can't just get there in one day without causing major, major pain to the entire world infrastructure.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of interesting though. I wonder how like COVID has reduced, I should have looked at this before the episode, but I wonder like, people haven't been flying as much. I know jet fuel is like a major contributor.
Dude, there were some great visualizations of the air above China before and after lockdown. Air in China during COVID. Let's see. There were some really interesting like photos of the air above like Beijing and places that showed like how much cleaner the air got during lockdown.
Yep.
Find them. We'll have to look them up later and include them in the show notes, but there was definitely a big impact.
He has this line, by the way, in the book where he said, "No terrestrial civilization can be anything else but a solar society dependent on the sun's radiation." And he means by that, he means like obviously the biomass and the wood and all that, but wind and water flows are also dependent in many ways on the sun.
Yeah.
Yep. And then of course fossil fuels are originally the energy came from the sun, right? So I found one exception to that when I was doing my research before the episode. Uranium was not created as part of the solar system or by the sun, which is wild.
Oh, that's a good point. It's from here before,
I didn't know
right?
that. I didn't know that. Yeah, it says uranium was apparently formed in a supernova about 6.6 billion years ago, which is super cool. It's older than the solar system.
Well, that's actually a good segue because he has some interesting stuff on like nuclear energy here.
Yep.
And I didn't realize this, but the very first nuclear reactors were for submarines. They weren't for like commercial energy production. And so the original nuclear reactors were designed for propelling submarines. And if, a submarine melts down underwater, it sucks for the people on it, obviously, but it's not going to really have a broader impact beyond that submarine.
Right.
But then they basically just took those reactors and put them on land and use them to start generating power. And, that kind of explains some of the early meltdowns and challenges they had. And nuclear is...
In my opinion, it just hasn't even been really given a fair chance, because it was, to your point, it wasn't built, the designs they're using right now are not built from the idea of
I think a lot of the ones they use today are.
The newer ones are, but those aren't even
melted down.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. And the ones that they have in France, I think now, and I think India has been building a few, and I forget, there are a couple other countries.
And there's all these bad images of nuclear, but more people die per day from pollution and such from oil and coal than have died in the entire history of nuclear. It's actually insane. If you look at the body count by energy source, more people die from solar than have died from nuclear.
Yeah.
That was the really wild one.
But you got a really bad image from nuclear, right? You got Hiroshima and you just got, and it's got this conflation between
5 Mile Island. And,
but you don't, I mean, imagine if every time you thought about filling up your gas tank, you thought about a burning oil field in Iraq or something, right?
Yeah.
That's not the image that crosses your head when you go fill up your gas tank. But with nuclear, somebody says, "Oh, we're considering building a nuclear plant," and the first image that goes through your head is those atom bomb explosion videos that they have that you've no doubt seen. It's really bad marketing.
Well, and it's so I've got the numbers up here, but remember the really bad Fukushima meltdown?
Yeah. Yep.
How many people do you think died in that incident?
250.
4.
Maybe more. 4?
Yeah.
That's it?
Right?
Wow.
I
didn't realize that.
it's crazy how low these body counts actually are. I mean, how many people do you think died in Chernobyl?
Well, that was probably unreliable, right? What the I'll guess. I'll guess 1,000.
It looks like 47. Wow. Now, the caveat is that there's an estimated up to about 4,000 possible cancer deaths that came later. Right.
But, well, okay, I have this kind of bone to pick with that. Yes, okay, not a bone to pick. That's a real number, right? Or an estimate.
Yeah.
But the way we talk about deaths is kind of strange, and it applies to COVID too, right? I don't know what the right metric is, but it's something you almost want to subtract life expectancy versus when somebody dies or something that.
That's been the big issue with a lot of the COVID death reporting now is, and this is why the main metric I've been looking at is the excess death rate.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yep.
It's if you look at a city and you hear, oh, there were 100 COVID deaths last week, and then you have to ask yourself okay, but how many of those people were sort of about to die from some other disease as well, and then they got it in the hospital or they got it in the nursing home or whatever. Yep. But the excess death rate tells you a lot. You look at the excess death rate for New York City when it was going through its horrible COVID crisis, and it's oh, this is clearly a huge fucking issue.
Right.
But then there was all of that
that's what I mean, because it's even the suspected cancer, let's say from Chernobyl, right? It's you got to look at if somebody developed the excess cancer over the because
the actual delta there.
Yeah, because I'm not saying nobody. I'm sure a lot of people developed cancer because of Chernobyl, but then to basically take the raw 4,000 number is let's say everybody in the area who got cancer, but maybe 400 of them would have gotten it anyway, right?
Yeah.
And then 3,600 were excess over the baseline, right? It's that's how you got to look at it, not necessarily the raw number. But it's easier to just say deaths or suspected deaths than that.
You want to know another very semi-cancelable take on excess death rate and COVID?
Ooh, let's hear it.
If you look at some cities, excess death rate has gone down because people aren't going out, and so they're not getting in car accidents. They're not having accidents of drinking too much or doing other stupid shit and dying. And
that I believe.
in like some cities, COVID has actually been good for the excess death rate, even though people are dying from it because everyone's staying inside. It's like, obviously COVID's not a good thing, right? Like nobody's saying that. It's just kind of interesting when you compare like, okay, if we, it's like, how do you, like you were saying, how do you measure death rate from something? Because
I mean, that's
like, if 10 kids don't get hit by cars and one person dies of COVID, is that a bad thing? It doesn't seem like a bad thing, but it seems weird to say it's not a bad thing, right?
Yeah. Oh,
it's
that's so interesting.
Yeah.
It's the same idea between, that and then, with COVID, I also saw that, and I don't think this is a cancelable take, but whatever. That
the COVID stuff gets so squirrely. It's like even very reasonable things about it.
Because we're just trying to like look at the numbers. I mean, that's just we're just trying to make sense of the numbers, not even look at them. We're just trying to make sense of them. Yeah, no.
I think what happened is go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I'll just say this, and then I think I know where you're going, and we'll pick that up. But what I was going to say is that the medical error deaths also went down. Like, because nobody's doing
people
elective surgeries.
Yeah, exactly.
So
that one's really interesting to me too, because I mean, there's a lot of those, and
I think I saw like not heart attacks, but there was like some
heart attacks
other
have gone down.
Yeah,
heart attacks have decreased.
I wasn't making that.
Death by heart attack have decreased. Yeah,
which is
but there was I shared this somewhere. There was a good research paper on that, and it was sort of asking the question like, okay, why is this happening? And one of the things it pointed out is that there are actually a number of like mild heart attacks that people have that they could actually just like ride out on their own. And like, by the way, if anybody's listening to this and you think you're having a heart attack, please go to the hospital. Like, this is not medical advice. But what the article was saying is that like people get unnecessary interventions in very mild heart attacks sometimes, and then they can die from those. And now people who are having like mild versions of things aren't going to the hospitals. And so they're not getting unnecessary treatments that could lead to them dying. It's like the perfect example of, iatrogenics and harm by the healer.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. I mean, we know somebody who has a condition that requires a stomach tube, and he had to go to the hospital to get it, I think not changed, but like there was something that was wrong with it. So
like me and you, or like you and your family?
I said he. Well, yeah, my family knows somebody who.
Oh, okay.
Who
I thought you were saying you and I know somebody. I was like,
no. Okay. So, but he had to go to the hospital. I think it was like blocked or something very minor. But it required like an overnight, because I think there was some type of like very minor surgery needed. And while there, he got pneumonia, and he was there for like a couple weeks. I mean, luckily he was fine after, but it was just like a hospital-acquired infection, right? He did not go in with pneumonia. But that, overnight thing, the next day is like, he developed symptoms of that, and they thought it was COVID. So that also made it, worse. And it's just like going to the hospital is generally not a good thing. So less people go to the hospital.
Yeah, I mean, less people go to the hospital. Like medical mistakes kill more people than any individual cancer, I think.
Yeah, let's see. Like medical mistake. That's 2019. Let's see.
It's like top 10 cause of mortality or something.
Yeah. So this is from last year. It says researchers estimate that an annual 251,454 U.S. deaths, or 9.5% of all annual U.S. deaths, result from medical error, making it the third leading cause of death after heart disease and cancer.
Yeah.
So it's a lot. I mean, of course, like, yes, if you feel like you need to go to the hospital, go to the hospital. Like, we're not saying, we're not giving medical advice. But
the question is, when do you need to go to the hospital? That's always the question I'm asking myself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's also just an interesting, when we're just going back to like the numbers, it's just an interesting way to look at like the big picture, right? Of what's, what were you saying before? You were like, the reason it gets all squirrely.
Oh, I was saying that as soon as we started using terms like anti-maskers, it got into the realm of vaccines, and like that area is so charged that then it kind of like took on that religious fervor, I think. And now it's like,
why do some things take on that religious fervor? Like, I'm very curious what the psychology is.
Yeah, that's a great question. Because I mean, the vaccine thing is so interesting. It's like you can't even talk about it in any capacity, right? Yep. And like COVID feels like it's, or some topics related to it are like getting to that level too. But nobody gets really upset when you talk about What's a political issue that people don't get that upset when you talk about? Because maybe it's just that it's a political thing.
That's actually like, I don't know. Let me think. Is there any that are not supercharged?
What's something that like everybody pretty much agrees is a
taxes.
good thing? I don't know.
Taxes generally, like people can get like they don't get religious.
They get pretty charged about that. They don't get religious. People get pretty religious about their like financial philosophy, I think, right? Like how much you think that
that's true.
People should pay taxes. Like, you know, it's like, I think we saw that with Trump's whole $750 nonsense.
Is there anything that people don't like get religious about? That's a better question. I
feel like there are things that are just sort
of degrees though. There's degrees.
Yeah. Too. And there's stuff that everyone's kind of like on the same page about. And isn't that like, I feel like marijuana legalization, nobody's like that upset about it anymore.
I'm still shocked. I know we did an episode of this like 2 years ago. I'm still shocked that hasn't happened because I bet if you like, it feels to me, I don't know, I'm not in this world, right? Like I'm not in the political realm. So I have no idea if this is true or not. To me, it feels like low hanging fruit.
Dude, like, it would be a no fucking brainer for Trump to pass that with an executive order right now.
Yeah,
it's like you want to win over a bunch of centrist voters.
Yeah. Well, and not even that. You can make an easy argument to both sides. Like one side, you say like forget about the incarceration for something that's basically harmless, not harmless, but like not harmful, and not any more harmful than alcohol. Let's say.
Yeah.
I mean, at a very minimum, right? You can just make that argument. So it's like, why are we putting these people in jail? You make the argument to the left there. And then to the right, you say, well, look at all the new tax revenue we're going to generate from a drug, basically, right?
Yeah.
And like we'll be more fiscally responsible and reduce the deficit and, whatever. And
marijuana is so crazy in the US right now. It's like, I went to Seattle and I went to a dispensary and you walk in, it's like a fucking Apple store.
It's cool.
They've got, it's so cool. And they're like so helpful.
In 2018, I had that experience too. And I was like, this is almost this is probably cooler than a bar, like the way they had it.
Oh yeah. But then like you come back to Texas and you've got to like find somebody to text and you got to like meet up in a public place. And like everyone's got to make sure everyone else is cool. And it's like, how is this the same country? It's so wild.
I had a conversation. There's a company that I was talking to that's based in France, and they basically do packaging for different industries. So like pharmaceuticals and food and consumer products and stuff. And the guy was saying how he was asking me actually about like, how does marijuana work in the US? Cause he's like, we got a client recently from Colorado, but then they said they only sell in Colorado. And I was very confused because I was like, the US is a big country. Why is this order so small? And and I was trying to explain it to him and he was so confused about what I was talking about. I was just like, it's like legal there.
Next too.
Yeah. Well, they are legal in Ann Arbor. I think
they're
right?
decriminalized.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they might be legal for prescription use. I'm not 100%. It's like, it's so hard to keep track.
Yeah. You need there needs to be like an app. Like, can I do this in the place I'm staying? Right? Like detects your location. You have like the choice of a few different, all these different controversial behaviors, right? And you're like, can I smoke weed in this particular spot?
Nevada, prostitution, good. Mushrooms, bad. All right, let's go.
Yep, exactly. I feel like that would be hard to make. Somebody should make that.
That would be hilarious. Like not even an app, just like a
website.
You could call it like the fun person's guide to the United States, and it's like a little color coded map.
Yep, that'd be cool.
Texas, guns good, marijuana bad.
Yeah, it's just like, I mean, you get so confused going from one. I mean, it's, oh man, if you dive into like gun laws state to state, it's also super interesting, right? It's like one thing will be legal in one state, one thing will be like legal in Virginia. You cross into Maryland or into DC, and it's like you're going to jail.
I mean, it's hilarious how easy it is to buy a gun here. And to just like walk around with them. It's like whenever I go to the range, you walk in, like nobody's wearing masks, of course. I'm just like, do I need to check on my gun or thing? They're like, no, man, you're good. Just like go find a spot. It's like, or you
have fun.
You go to Cabela's and somebody basically just walks up and is like, yeah, I want like that, pump shotgun or whatever. And they pull it off the wall. They look at it for a sec. They go check out. Like you have to check ID and you have to sign a few things, but there's no like registration. There's no holding period.
If you want more on this topic, we did an episode, Riddle of the Gun. I actually want to revisit that one. I want to
Yeah.
I want to hear what we said. Sometimes we surprise ourselves.
Well, and back when we did that episode, I owned no guns, and now I own 3 guns. So
and you've had more experience now, and I feel like also, in a weird way, that topic is not as religiously charged. Like
it's gotten less intense.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say. It's like at that time, I think it was much more charged. I'm not saying it's not charged now. It's definitely still charged, but it's like less. I don't know how to describe it. It's just less energy in that whole debate.
Yeah. I also just wonder how much though of that is like our friend group and the people we're exposed to, where it's like, I have a lot of friends who hunt, and like I live in Texas, and I'm just like exposed to that world a lot more than I was like in college or when I was living in New York. Right? It's like a very different.
That's a good point. It's different
here.
It's different. It's that. Well, yeah, it's definitely that. I think. I mean, the other part of it is I feel like people are less. I mean, this could be a cool episode if we did seeing like a state. But generally, I feel like right now, one reason or another, like people are just less trusting of the state, and so like self-defense I feel like is more just at the forefront of people's mind. I don't know, this might just be, as you said, our own circles, but I've seen people who I know, like I've seen post in the past anti-gun type of stuff, and now I think they own weapons. Like I don't know for sure, but I get the sense that they do.
Dude, I mean, Texas has basically been sold out of guns and ammo for 4 months. Like everybody's getting them now.
Yeah. So it's, I mean, that's one that I think is less charged, but yeah, there's certain other areas like COVID, just for one reason or another, has become just a complete, because you can't have a logical discussion either on it with people.
Well, and the other thing that is definitely true too is that everyone's getting different information feeds.
That's a great point. I think that's maybe the root of the problem for all of these issues.
Yeah. I feel like that is a big part of it, where it's like people log onto Twitter or Facebook or whatever, and they're getting a feed that feeds into their biases, and that reinforces what they were already thinking about this stuff. And then they encounter someone who thinks something else, and you've got this like righteous indignation about it. And like,
there's not really the shared assumptions that you have as before.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, I saw this a lot on my Twitter when I even like asked the question about hydroxychloroquine, right?
I remember that. You told me about that. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, this is a fairly benign question. Like I probably could have phrased it in a less like provocative manner, but still I was just sort of surprised by how divisive it was in the comments, like other people arguing with each other, not even necessarily directed at me.
Right.
But
yeah, anyway. I remember seeing that. I remember you told me about that. I went and looked, and yeah, it was very active comment section.
Should we like actually talk about something from the book for the last 10 minutes here?
Yeah.
that was an epic tangent.
Epic tangent. Yeah, I feel like that's almost an episode in itself. We could have. I don't know what, like, if there's even a book tied to that, or if there's somebody who's talked about this lack of shared assumptions. I think between different tribes. I mean, that would be an interesting topic, but. Back to the book. End tangent. So I think this is chapter 6 where I have the fossil fueled civilization. Did I skip a whole chapter? Did we already do 5?
We're gonna have to skip.
Yeah,
a lot of stuff.
But I thought this was
interesting
really,
wrapping up points. But
yeah. So this was, I thought, a really good one just because it ties actually into something from scale. So I'll read this from the book. It says, when in 1900, a Great Plains farmer held the reins of 6 large horses while plowing his wheat field, he controlled with considerable physical exertion, perched on a steel seat and often enveloped in dust, no more than 5 kilowatts of animate power. A century later, his great-grandson, sitting high above the ground in the air-conditioned comfort of his tractor cabin, controlled effortlessly more than 250 kilowatts of diesel engine power. And I thought that was like, I mean, just look at the difference between 5 kilowatts to 250 kilowatts. And then in that same amount of time, you go from a coal-fired locomotive, so from 1900, going at close to 100 kilometers an hour, commanded 1 megawatt of steam power, which was like the maximum performance, I guess, they could get from stoking coal. By the year 2000, so 100 years later, pilots of a Boeing 747 retracing the transcontinental route 11 kilometers aloft could choose an auto mode for a large part of the journey, as 4 gas turbines developed up to about 120 megawatts, and the plane flew at 900 kilometers an hour.
That's crazy.
And that's in 100 years. Like, so to me, that brought like the speed of innovation, right? That happened. I'm sure if you redid that from 2000 to I mean, I don't know what, the current state of the art is on planes, but in the 20 years, I don't know if, that's a lot different than what it was in 2000, but at least from 1900 to 2000, that's an epic change.
Seriously. Dude, Boom Arrow just released their prototype. I'm so excited for that to actually
that looks super cool.
Yeah.
That looks super cool.
For anybody who's not aware, Boom Arrow is a new supersonic jet company that just released their first prototype jet.
Why do we do this? This is not a tangent, I promise, because it ties back to the nuclear energy thing. Why do we do this that after, as a species, after one high profile accident or mistake, we just abandon an idea, right? So you had Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island with nuclear, and then we just were kind of oh, that's too dangerous. Let's not do that. And then with the Concorde, right, there was a couple accidents, and we're just yeah, we're not going to do supersonic jets like that anymore.
I did some digging on this, and what I found is that the Concorde wasn't killed by the accidents. It was killed by the reduction in flying after 9/11.
Oh, interesting. So they just didn't have enough business to keep.
Yeah, they didn't have enough business to stay alive. Exactly.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I guess in my mind it was the accidents, but I guess that's not true. Maybe it's just the timing of that, combined with 9/11. Just that was the end of it.
Yeah, low passenger numbers.
But I'm surprised nobody's tried since then. Maybe it just wasn't necessary. Or here's the other thing. It's kind of like a not a monopoly, but an oligopoly with the airlines, right? It's not like there's a ton of competition. I mean, there is a ton of competition between them, but they're all playing with the same variables, right? It's not like one plane design is radically one airline has a radically a UFO shaped a UFO shaped airplane, and the other one has a normal looking airplane. So maybe there's just wasn't it just wasn't a vector they were innovating on.
I think the other reason, honestly, is that there just hasn't been much hardware innovation in the last, there hasn't been much big hardware innovation in the last 10, 20 years, probably because if you're a super talented engineer, you can make a lot more money a lot faster building apps and software.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a lot more talent going into that. I mean, how many really impressive hardware companies are there from the last 10 years? I can think of Apple, SpaceX, Tesla.
Yeah. Actually, that's probably where the most impressive example is
I don't feel like I'm even being facetious here. I have a hard time naming many of them. But then you think of impressive software companies, and the list just goes on and on and on and on and on.
That's a really good point.
So I bet there's just hasn't been much engineering talent looking at it. I feel I hope that we're moving back in that direction. I honestly feel like Musk has kind of sparked a resurgence in interest in big engineering challenges.
Yeah.
From the stuff that they're doing.
That's a really good point, actually. Now that I think about it, I can't name any more than the ones you just named. In terms of mainstream, everybody knows them. Yeah. That's a good point.
$1 billion hardware companies from.
I feel like billion's even too low of a threshold, right? It's because you could say $1 billion threshold would be Nest would count under that. And I don't.
That's a good point. That's not that
really
impressive.
Count Nest.
That's, I mean, and that to me is a software company. It's they didn't have some crazy innovation in
in their device
camera technology.
Yeah, right? It was more the user friendliness and that was
connecting it to your phone, right? I don't even Uber's not really a hardware company to me. It's a software company, right? They made an awesome app for triangulating drivers.
Yeah, I mean, the first generation of 3D printing companies was interesting. I think they were a little early. I think we'll actually see more in 3D printing that's just a random prediction, but 10 to 20 years, I think that'll become more I'm not saying in 10 to 20, I mean over the next 10 to 20 years, I think that'll be much more interesting than it is right now. Just especially with space travel, really starting to. I think in the next decade, that'll really become more in the forefront. And then that's going to require a lot of hardware innovation.
Definitely.
Maybe that'll be the spark. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, I think once space is opened up more, we're going to see a lot more companies in that area.
Yeah.
I mean, just stuff like asteroid mining and all of that potential is pretty neat. So.
Yeah, and it just requires a lot of new stuff that we don't really have right now. So
and I feel building this whole software layer for the internet to enable doing this other hardware stuff was a worthwhile project, right? I'm not necessarily criticizing, innovation over the last 20 years. It's just it's all been like in our phones, basically.
Right. And whereas if you look at, especially from the book, like some of the stuff that he was talking about, like the massive companies that were created through the infrastructure involved in transforming energy. Like he has a short list that I had highlighted, which was his like examples of global companies. And he's talking about in energy are like Schlumberger, Halliburton, Sapiem, Transocean, Baker for oil field services, Caterpillar, Komatsu, Volvo, Hitachi, Liebherr for heavy construction machinery, GE, Siemens, Alstom, Weir Allen, and Elliott for large steam turbines, and Boeing and Airbus for jet airliners. Like that was the 20th century, I feel like, right? Like developing that infrastructure. And I wonder, like this is I don't know if this is like how to wrap up the book, but this is a thought is like, I wonder, 50, 100 years from now, are, Google, Apple, are these going to be like sort of the table stakes type of companies? Like, nobody really views, like, I'm not saying what they do, like, let's say Chevron or Exxon or like Halliburton or any of these types of companies. I'm not saying what they do is, easy or like not important. Like it's obviously, as we just talked about, the oil infrastructure, it kind of powers the world, but it's not where like the breakthrough innovation is coming from. Right. And I wonder if sort of like, the Apple, Google type of companies of the world are like just like a necessary stage. Right. And it's like, they're still going to be around, but are they going to be at, sort of the forefront of things? I know they're trying. I just don't know, is there something different about them, or are they like the next evolution of the same thing?
Yeah. I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting. I mean, I am hopeful that we see more hardware innovation just because it's so cool.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and we live in the hardware world, right? As much as we feel like we live in our computers.
I mean, I've loved getting to do more stuff in the real world in the last year or two instead of just like pushing pixels. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I think more and more people, when you sort of rediscover that, you find you really enjoy it. And not saying like, I mean, I don't know about you, I spend a lot of time on the computer too. So it's not that like I'm not spending time there, but we live in the real world. So it's, we don't really live in the computer just yet. Maybe someday.
All right. Should we wrap it up there?
Yeah. I'm just trying to see, is there anything else? I think we pretty much covered it.
We pretty much covered some parts of it. It's a long book with a lot of ideas that you all should just go check out.
We didn't even really talk about like coal and all that stuff, but you can check it out. I think it's, in my opinion, a really, really interesting book.
It is super interesting. Definitely
took me a long time to read though. I started while we were finishing up Scale. So that was at least 4 weeks ago. And I finished last night, by the way. So talk about like, last minute. But I didn't
that college energy, right? Like I do that too. Right. Yep. It's like, all right, I know when it's due, so I'm going to get it done just.
Exactly. I mean, I didn't speed through it because I realized pretty early on, like if I did, I wasn't going to like retain anything because it was, it's dense from that perspective. You can check out the book. Obviously, if you enjoyed the episode, share it with your friends, post about it, subscribe.
Leave us a nice review, subscribe.
Let Bill Gates know that we did an episode.
That's true. Maybe he'll come on for the next one.
Yeah.
He doesn't have much going on. He could probably use.
Or maybe he needs a break from vaccines and stuff. He can
talk
about energy.
Yeah. Talk about energy and vaccines. It'll be exciting.
Yeah. That would actually be pretty cool.
Actually, that'd be a cool topic to interview him on, like vaccine development.
Yeah. Just oh man, that's super cool. I feel like in like a year we'll know so much more about vaccine development than we do right now. Because imagine if these vaccines work. Like that would mean we can develop a vaccine in that short amount of time, which is just I think we talked about that last time on the Scale episode. Like that's kind of like the 4-minute mile barrier, right? Like
right.
Like nobody could run a 4-minute mile until everybody could. Not everybody, but it became like table stakes basically to do it. But it wasn't possible till it was done. It's very, very strange. But I feel like that would happen. That could happen, not will happen, but it could happen with drug development and vaccine development too, which would be just like a huge game changer for the world. Basically, if drug development was a year or two instead of 10 years, which is kind of the average right now.
Yeah, I mean, it would be good and bad, though. I mean, it'd be good for stuff like this, where it's like, because of the type of vaccine it is, it's fairly low risk for, things going wrong. But it's like, if something, if Lipitor got pushed through in a year instead of 10 years, right? It's like,
yeah, but I think like therapeutics
took 10 years and it still fucked up a bunch of people.
That's a good point. But yeah, but I mean, there's like stuff for, Alzheimer's and things that are just like, not, there's like nothing out there right now.
Right.
And you could push that through in 3 years, let's say, instead of 10, like you probably just saved not a whole generation, but you saved a lot of people probably with that. Yeah. I don't know. It'd be interesting. I'm like, I don't even know like what the reason is it takes 10 years. Like is it regulatory? Is it like the science takes that long? And then what went different this time, to enable it to move faster? But, we don't even know if they work yet. So that
right.
remains to be seen.
Remains to be seen. Alrighty. What book are we doing next? Have we decided?
We have not.
So we can't tell people what to read.
Well, okay. How about this? Let's pick one. Well, actually, when are we going to release this?
It'll probably come out like tomorrow or something.
Okay, so tomorrow would be Thursday. Let's decide by Monday. Let's give people like a few days for suggestions too. I have some ideas, which I'll text you.
Cool.
If you have an idea for a book, hit us up.
Here's the call to action. You have to follow us on Twitter to find out what the next book is.
Yep. Because we don't do the Patreon anymore, so you have to.
True.
You have to follow us. So I'm at the Rail Neil S.
And I am at Nat Eliason. We will see you there, and we'll see you next episode.